This idea of empathy, brief shout out to the book Bring 'Em All, made by one of our own, Don Stater, and 50th anniversary for ASAP. I get no
Right.
kickbacks from mentioning this, but Katie is featured prominently in that book. And part of it's a book full of compelling stories, but I think yours is particularly compelling for a number of reasons. But you touch on empathy in that book, and you touch on how there was a time in your training when you felt like that had been eroded from you, and how it took kind of a mindful effort to get that back, or to stem the tide and eventually rebuild it. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah.
I can't imagine a topic that's more
Yeah.
relevant for us as emergency providers and in our field.
And I think, and I've talked to residents a lot about this too, because I think whenever you feel like, and this happened to me in residency, and whenever you feel like you're disconnected from the patient or your calling or why you went into medicine, and that can very much happen in emergency medicine, it doesn't only take away from your work and how you treat patients and the kind of doctor you'd wanted to be, but it really does start to chip away at the image you have of yourself. And I think that is often why physicians end up being very cynical. I always say the cynic is not the person who doesn't care. Like, we know who that person looks like. The cynic is the person who feels helpless and feels that their optimism has been disappointed, and that they don't feel that they have control over that situation. And so I also tell them, that I believe empathy is a muscle you have to exercise just like anything. That everybody who goes into, and it's any helping profession, I mean, whether it's police, fire, emergency medicine, whatever, people go into those because teachers, they want to help others, right? They want to invest in others. And when that starts, what you imagine that to be is dispelled, everything starts to crumble around that. Like, who are you? Why did you decide to do this? Should I be a doctor? Because I don't like my patient in front of me, right? And that's a very common feeling. And I'm not going to tell you I love every patient, but I love 99% of my patients, right? And I felt like there was this one day in residency, my second year, where I really wasn't feeling that with my work and when I was interacting with patients, and it was very disconcerting to me. And I said, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be a doctor that's not enjoying that experience. And so right before I went into every room, I would tell myself, this is somebody's somebody, and this is about them. And I had to do that for about a year before I didn't have to do it anymore, and I haven't had to do it since. But I'm constantly reminding myself of that in real time, right? If I have, we get a lot of rough characters at Denver Health, and I'll have people who are kind of complaining, about certain patients, and not, and it's justified. They can be abusive, and and I'm also somebody of deep faith, and I say to myself in my head, Jesus in disguise, because it is a privilege to be able to take care of those people that nobody else really wants to take care of. That I can make even more of a difference for somebody that's being aggressive or disrespectful or doesn't seem to want our help, because I'm going to try, whereas I think a lot of people might not. And try and remember, and for me, what's become the biggest joy of medicine for me is getting to know people and learning their story and connecting them on a human level. I'll just give you an example. We had a guy once, he came in and he was homeless and was, really just grumpy African-American 80-year-old guy who the resident came and presented him to me and said, basically, he was cold. He doesn't really have any complaints. He has some underlying diagnosis of mild dementia, but I guess we'll call social work, and maybe get him some shoes. And I said, okay. So I went in to talk to him, and I'm not the fastest person in the world in the emergency department. And this is why. I think I ended up in the room with him for an hour. I learned all about his life story, how he had grown up on this small island with 20 people on the island manning a lighthouse with his family. That was his family's work. His mom was smart enough to send him to the mainland or the United States to get educated in Florida. And he ended up getting a PhD. He became a concert pianist, traveled all over the world. I'm just fascinated. I mean, he actually introduced me to a lot of classical music that I wasn't aware of. We ended up sending him to a respite, and I visited him there multiple times. And it just totally enriched my place in this world. And I feel like, the more you exercise that, the more you can connect with people in a shorter and shorter amount of time. And so that to me is the medicine after a while is the medicine, right? And I think everybody's going to do, if they're a good doctor, they're going to do the same kind of medicine. But that I know when I first went into medicine, I thought, I just want to save one life, and then that's it. And I realize now that it's really those moments that matter. We're always so focused on the end point, right, and on the result. But there's a lot of people we can't make that end result good. Whether it's a new cancer diagnosis or they are homeless and alcoholic, but that moment matters when you're with them. It matters a lot to them. I've come to find out in talking to them that we don't have to solve everything. But just to show our humanity and that we care about them is such a big gift. And it's a gift to me as well, because I get back so much from that in my work.
Yeah. I mean,
I feel like I talked too long
No.
after your question.
No.
I mean,
You know how I interrupt Pete when that's when Pete's talking to. That's a sign. So notice there was no interruption. It's just not too long.
am I cut off right now?
really-
Yeah, like for example now. Go ahead, Katie. If you're
But I do feel
Is this mic working? Is
Turn it
mic
off
working?
hours ago.
I do feel passionately about this, mostly because I think there's so many of us that are missing that experience that's so rich, and I'm so grateful for it. I don't know what I would do without it, honestly. And I think we all can get it if we can block out the noise of all the other stuff that's frustrating and just focus in that moment on the person in front of us.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to be a bit more cynical and maybe more practical about sort of the realities that we deal with. I think Katie, by her nature, obviously you could glean, she's sort of eternally optimistic, and she derives a lot of validation and meaning from helping other people. At the same time, I think that, as a community ER physician who feels challenged by, issues of charting or, maintaining throughput and patient satisfaction and, the regulatory environment, I think that, if you lose perspective on sort of the foundational aspect of the patient encounter, and you can't derive true meaning from helping 2 or 3 people on a shift, then medicine is not going to be a good fit for you as a career. At the same time, the reality is that I think with some mindfulness and taking an approach that this is a person. I'm seeing them in a continuum of their life. They're clearly here for some reason, and I'm here to, at least alleviate some measure of suffering and perhaps have an opportunity to really improve their healthcare outcomes. I mean, I think that if you go in with that type of mantra and mindset, you will find that it is an immensely rewarding career in the end. I mean, we have 3 kids who grew up watching us sort of develop our careers, and the 2 oldest ones have a demonstrated interest in medicine and actually emergency medicine. And I think that speaks volumes to the fact that, even 20 years out, with, me being a community doctor that goes into basically the same setting every single day, and the job has changed in many ways for the positive, but also many things that are negative, but yet I can still derive that immense satisfaction from the that isolated encounter and helping several people every single day that I show up. Which, when you compare that to other vocations, I mean, I think that in economics they talk about opportunity costs. What else would you be doing with your time and efforts? I mean, I think that there is foundationally no more noble profession, and I think that just the fact that this next generation of kids sees it as that is, I think, a reflection of really what the profession could represent at its best.
And I really think it's a millennial profession, honestly, in a lot of ways, because we have our finger on the pulse of what's happening in our community way before we know flu's hitting before we see it in the news.
Absolutely.
We know there's an uptick of violence. We know there's a problem with homelessness, substance abuse, the opioid epidemic. We're like, yeah, there's an opioid epidemic.
See it every day.
Like,
yep.
Hello. And so I think it really fits well for people who are also socially minded and want to be involved in almost social emergency medicine, right? Where they can not only have that inside view, but be a really effective advocate, because you can speak with authority and credibility about what you're seeing every day come in. And so I didn't realize, I went into emergency medicine because Peter was going into emergency medicine, honestly. I didn't know what I was going to do. And he was like, I'm doing emergency medicine. You should do emergency medicine. And Ron Walls, who was my mentor at the time, was like, you should do emergency. I was like, okay, I'm going to do emergency medicine. And, I believe I have a little guardian angel on my shoulder, which got Pete to me and got me into emergency medicine, because it really does, it ended up exactly what I should be doing, because I do gravitate to that social emergency medicine side of things, and there's very few professions like that where you can really have that authentic voice and be heard.